What government is due tribute, custom, fear, and honor? Reason 9 of 10 why Romans 13 is biblical government. Hello everybody, I'm Jim McCotter. Welcome. In Romans 13, 4 through 7, I read in part, quote, "For he is the minister of God to you for good, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that does evil. For this cause you pay tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues. Tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom is due, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor." End quote. The Greek word aphale, translated dues, involves a debt owed to another party. Many government officials demand tribute and custom. This does not mean it's due them. Only God's biblical government depicted by the Apostle Paul in Romans 13 would be a government that is due tribute, custom, fear, and honor. Honor to whom honor is due. Any government due tribute and custom would also be due fear, or as interpreted, reverence and honor. To owe any one of these is to owe them all. To think that honor is due to any or all governments that levy taxes on its subjects is preposterous. The German Nazi government, as only one example, was certainly not due any tribute. Sadly, what about the United States that has continued to replace God's law with man's wicked secular law? It has confiscated billions of our tax dollars to subsidize murdering babies in their mother's womb, sodomy, transsexualism, even drag queen shows, to name only a few. Are we to believe Paul intends for Christians to honor every government that blasphemes and defies God? When even contrary to what Paul described as biblical government in Romans 13. Realize what Paul also wrote in Romans 2, 5 through 8. Quote, "Because you are stubborn and refuse to turn from your sin, you are storing up terrible punishment for yourself. For a day of anger is coming when God's righteous judgment will be revealed. He will pour out his anger and wrath on those who live for themselves, who refuse to obey the truth and instead live lives of wickedness." End quote. Does God expect us to render honor and reverence to those to whom he will render his wrath and judgment? Paul's statement, quote, "For this cause," eliminates anyone who is not due tribute, custom, fear, and honor. He explicitly declares these things are owed the authorities he describes because they are doing good to the righteous and restraining the wicked, not just randomly, but continually. This is what enjoins Christians to render them tribute, custom, fear, and honor. Tribute to whom tribute is due. Puritan Pastor Jonathan Mayhew delineated between God's civil ministers that rule versus mere powers that rule in Romans 13:7. He wrote, "Here the apostle argues the duty of paying taxes from this consideration, that those who perform the duty of rulers are continually attending upon the public welfare." But how does this argument conclude for paying taxes to such princes as are continually endeavoring to ruin the public, and especially when such payment would facilitate and promote this wicked design? End quote. Paul delineates God-ordained authorities as ministers of God who continually serve the Lord. When Paul wrote, "For this cause," we are to pay tribute, he was referring to the biblical taxes for biblical government as he predicted in Romans 13. God directed Moses to select the same kind of godly civil rulers and government as Paul was describing in Romans 13. So we read in Exodus 18:21 where Moses said, quote, "But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials who will rule." End quote. Such representatives, these representatives of God, are due tribute, etc. Fear to whom fear is due. In Psalms 111:10, Proverbs 1:7, and Proverbs 9:10, they all read this, quote, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." To fear the Lord is synonymous with reverencing the Lord. In other words, reverence to whom reverence is due. Is reverence due to an unrighteous or even wicked secular government or wicked rulers? But such reverence is due to biblical government that Paul predicts. Godly parents are to be reverenced because they are God-ordained representatives of the Lord. The same is true for God-ordained civil authorities. But what about if someone supplants your parents? Should they be due your reverence? The government Paul depicts in Romans 13 is not secular, but a biblical civil body politic whose God-ordained servants would be due your tribute, custom, fear, and honor. Rendering to Caesar. In Mark 12:13 through 17, it says, quote, "The Pharisees and Herodians came to trap Jesus, and they said to him, 'Is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not? Shall we give or shall we not give?' But Jesus, knowing their hypocrisy, said unto them, 'Why are you trying to trap me? Show me a Roman coin that I may look at it.' And they brought it. And he said unto them, 'Whose is this image and subscription?' They said unto him, 'Caesar's.' And Jesus answering said unto them, 'Render to Caesar then the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.' And his reply completely amazed them." End quote. Jesus trapped the Pharisees big time when he did not have a Roman coin, but asked them to show him one. Roman coins on one side bore the graven image of Caesar, and on the other side was written Divi Filius, which translates Son of God. There were lots of different coins in those days, but they did not all have graven images on them. And all good Jews considered carrying the ones that did not have the Roman coin graven image, as they considered that blasphemous. God's second commandment said, quote, "You must not make for yourself any graven image," end quote, much less declaring Caesar as Son of God. And of course, Jesus did not believe in stealing. Therefore, give back to Caesar or anyone whatever belongs to them. Jesus trapped the Pharisees with their own trap. They ended up being self-condemned in front of all the Jews. Nonetheless, if the statement, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's," is to be taken at face value, there would be little reason for Christ's antagonists to be amazed at his reply. Furthermore, if the common interpretation is correct, Jesus would be a thief were he to use what belonged to Caesar for his kingdom, a kingdom opposed to Caesar's, according to Acts 17:6 and 7. Today, the term Caesar is often used to represent government in general. However, at that time, Christ made this statement, Caesar was a flesh and blood Roman dictator. Therefore, to correctly discern Jesus' response, we must ask ourselves, what exactly belonged to Caesar that didn't belong to God? Did the bodies, souls, and spirits of man belong to Caesar? Did the people's lands and other possessions belong to this Roman emperor? Did reverence, honor, and obedience belong to this tyrant? Caesar, of course, would have insisted all these things belonged exclusively to him. However, we're concerned with Caesar's due, not merely what his claim was due. What about tribute? Romans 13:7 informs us to render to all their dues tribute to whom tribute is due, end quote. In verse 6, Paul indicated all of these things are due to God's ministers, end quote. Did Caesar qualify as one of the servants of God depicted by Paul in verse 3 or 4? Quote, "A terror to the wicked and a blessing to the righteous," end quote. Even people who maintain Romans 13 is about secular government are adverse to identifying Caesar as one of God's ministers for good. Why? Because Caesar was precisely the opposite. These questions are extremely important because Caesar's disposition is crucial in determining what was due him. The Ahabs, Jezebels, and Caesars of this world should get what is due them, but are such powers due what Paul listed in Romans 13, or are they due something else altogether? It's a safe bet Jason and his Christian brethren did not believe Caesar's agents were due the things enumerated by Paul. Rather, they were, as Acts 17:5 through 7 describes, quote, "lewd fellows of the baser sort." They drew Jason and certain brethren into the rulers of the city, intending to incriminate them, crying, "These that have turned the world upside down have come here also." and these all do contrary to the decrees of Caesar, saying, there is another king, one Jesus, end quote. It's unfathomable Paul vindicated Caesar by teaching Christians were obligated to honor him and his, quote, rulers of the baser sort, end quote. But what belongs to God and what belongs to Caesar? The answer to that first question answers the second question. The Lord is sovereign and reigns over all and owns everything. Psalms 21:1, quote, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The world and all its people belong to him, end quote. What does this leave for Caesar? Even Caesar didn't belong to Caesar. Jesus' retort to the scheming Pharisees and Herodians was merely another example of his trapping them with their own words. In this instance, he was forcing them to choose their God, the Lord or Caesar, much the same as Elijah with the double-minded Israelites on Mount Carmel in 1 Kings 18:21, quote, how long will you halt between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him, end quote. When interpreted correctly, Romans 13:1-4 proves that Caesar is identified as an illegitimate authority, except for those like the Pharisees and Herodians who choose him over the Lord God.